not about this because I promise you, I can bring 3 engineers here and we just illustrated it. The engineers on the 2 sides who said LED is expensive, another person said LED is cheap. The point isn't whether one person is right or wrong. The point is that when we get into the room, how do you make your case? For example, you can make your case by saying, maybe we should factor in the cost of audit. Maybe that's the way you make your case. Another person will make their case by saying, let's do a life cycle assessment. What's going to be ultimately important is how does all of this fit into the strategic direction of the company? And I gave you the example of, we can say water usage, we can say waste. You know, we can identify 10 possible RCP solutions. But if the strategic direction for us today is energy, it's not like water usage isn't important. It's not like, you know, those other things are not important. But our strategic priority today is energy use, and so we would focus on energy use. Sometimes that's what would, you know, make us, that's what would decide what we want to, you know, go with. Do you understand, Michael? So this isn't about absolute correctness, because like I said, how are you sure that pasteurization is more expensive than this other one when I've not put up any price on the board? Because there might be someone who will say, I'll just go to Aba to make this. Another person will say, I'll go and fly that in from China. And another person would say, I'll bring it in from Germany. And the cost implication across those 3 options will be different. So there's no absoluteness to it to say this is more expensive, because even within the same solution set, there might be different price points. Am I convinced? I came ready for you. So that's assuming that someone like me now, going outside, I see something, and I will do that.
Definitely, if you are in that department. Now we're talking about bakery, right? So every bakery staff are in different departments in the bakery. So imagine leaving the place where the oven is, and because it's time for lunch break. Of course, you're not doing any production, and you just want to go out for a 1 hour break, and you forgot, out of excitement that you are hungry, you want to eat, you want to turn off the oven. When you get to it, they're like, have you turned off the oven? You understand? Oh, you remember, you run back. You've saved that energy for that 1 hour or that 2 hours. But if there's no signage, you understand? Imagine what the company will lose in that 1 hour. That's the watts, you understand? And then,
sorry, take the next one.
Okay, so I think we have fixing oven doors. Oven doors is to reduce heat loss. Yes, it's also of high impact and of low cost. Yes, it's of high impact and of low cost. What again?
Let's do one more, yeah?
Okay. One more?
Okay.
Okay, so let me use something that's different. Okay. Switching from diesel, right? From diesel generator to solar hybrid.
Sorry, one more.
switching from solar diesel generator to solar hybrid is of high impact and of high cost.
Is there any table that thinks posting energy saving signage for staff is not high impact?
If it is pasted on the door, when going out, you can see it. So I'm of the view that it is of low impact. That's my position.
Thank you, sir.
What both of them are actually saying, sorry, can I see?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So, Michael made a very good point. However, the analogy that he used, I have a bit of challenge with it. Because instead of putting signage to remind me to go and put up the oven, can I just put a sticker? And I'm very sure that will come cheaper. Okay, so but the signage is to direct people, giving direction in the environment, so that people are not bumping into items that are just there, giving direction. Maybe in that sense, the signage will work. Exactly. So I think I have issue with this analogy, but not necessarily the idea.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Someone said signage is not the same thing as sticker. And I promise you, I promise you it's a great point. Because even though someone might have said, let's use signage, and it will look like sticker is not part of the assignment, he can say that, you know what, this thing can suddenly become low cost if we use just a different material. So I'm saying even when we've highlighted our solutions, by bringing more people to the table, someone can say you can simply just switch this thing out from signage to sticker. And all of a sudden, what someone might consider as high cost suddenly becomes low cost. What someone might consider as low impact might suddenly become high impact. So I like that this happened. Now, let's battle things out for just 2 minutes. And, okay, this is my gross.
So, like me, some run on diesel, some run on electricity. So, like I'm suggesting, instead of stressing yourself on whether to put signage or sticker, why don't you shut down the whole...
You don't want signage. You don't want sticker.
I think because when you took us through your slides, there were some things that we need to do before we actually write the business plan. So I call that feasibility study. So and you have pre-feasibility study as well. I have options, various options. I might want to go for wind energy, I might want to go for solar and the likes. Now, looking at this now, why do I need to post energy signage for staff? It's a culture thing. I can even do it as a screensaver, rather than spending money to go and do stickers or signages. Another thing you can do is, in some organizations, you have the security guys. They've been employed internally. They're not spending additional cost. By 4 o'clock, when everybody leaves, they shut down the whole system. So when you're looking at it compared to other alternatives, it is high cost. So it's high impact, high cost.
Thank you. We're giving you framework. Pre-feasibility study.
So yes, no, whether you use sticker or you use maybe a plastic card, signage is different signs or symbol that conveys information. So whether you use a cardboard and write on it, it's when that someone can actually read and grab the information. And when you talk of safety your signage, it's not just for your staff, even for a visitor. That person, one can walk into a boiler if he doesn't have information. He doesn't know, one to a steam boiler. So that is why it's of utmost important. If it is not safe, it is not right. So safety is of high impact. Once you talk about signage, because they're not looking only to your staff, even for a visitor, even like a regulatory authority, a person can walk into your plant without direction. A visitor, you may walk into an oven without knowing. So it's of high impact for me. As long as anything is safety, we should prioritize. And it's actually very cheap when you use a cardboard. As long as if it's friend to change it, most likely that you pass an information.
Energy saving signage. Not safety signage. Energy saving
signage.
All right.
But
no.
Wait.
I know that you immediately attack me. What I was going to say, as a retort is, when you go and you say what's a signage, and you're right about your definition, there are usually cultural differences. So in certain places, when you say signage, people are thinking about, big, and so when someone sometimes might say, let's distinguish this between what a sticker is and what a signboard is. Again, I'm trying not to make this an English class or an absolute class. I'm saying that you'll notice that what I said in response to them was, you can have something that is not on the list, and someone will say this same thing will serve the purpose. For example, you gave the example of, how about we just use a cardboard? Like, it doesn't even have to be printed at all. You just buy a cardboard, you use biro and pencil. Someone like you that's very artistic, as I'm looking at you like this, you'll be artistic. You can just write it. Some other person will say we can use paper, it's just a paper, Someone will say let's use markers. My point is that something that we can perceive as high cost sometimes, you do the same thing that will achieve the same purpose, and someone will propose something just slightly different that will still serve the same purpose. So the person that wrote this, for example, might have in mind, a plastic-based signage, and we might consider that as high cost. And you can walk into the room and say, why do we need to spend money on a plastic-based signage when we can just use a sticker? And ultimately, the purpose is that we want to pass information across to staff. You wanted to say something?
Yes, you said it all. But one signage, energy saving signage, at the entrance of the company, just to serve two purposes: reminder and as illumination to the environment. Maybe when sundown, okay? And equally too, we also look at what we call code of conduct. If the company place high premium to safety and energy efficiency, they may decide to say, okay, we may have a lot of inflow of customers, visitors. Just switch on the restroom for a period of 2-3 hours. You have implication, cost implication. Why don't you put it to remind, to serve as alarm? Cardboard, many people may not see it. It may not be visible, but just a single energy saving bulb at the entrance where everybody enters and leaves. And most of the customers, for example, the bank, go to restroom frequently and they refuse to switch off the light. Overall, throughout the month, when they calculate the cost, the fractional cost, just the energy bulb in the restroom, they have a percentage. They can put it. So it now depends on the policy of the company. That's why I said code of conduct is important.
We're not looking at this only from the quantitative perspective, but qualitative.
Yeah.
Now, for instance, we're all seated here, we leave our offices, the light may go off before we leave the office.
Yeah.
And we may not be reminded that we left, the lights were on before we left.
Yeah.
So most times you find out that when the erratic lights come back, you find out that the whole office is left lit all through the night. That's not efficient in terms of cost. But when you have an energy saving signage that even when the light goes off, you still have something. It reminds you constantly that you need to go back and switch off the light. That is from the qualitative part of it. And over time, it becomes part of the system. The other is compliance issue. It's, when they comply, they want to find out that you have signs around your factory or offices that will remind staff to be compliant in terms of energy saving and whatever.
Thank you. Please keep that around. I don't know how you sound at all, so I wanted it to be the last festival.
Okay. We consider the impact. During your teaching at the review stage, you made mention of not the impact now. We don't know whether it's only on the environment or on the finance aspect. So we want to check the impact because I study forestry and biotechnology, actually. And when it comes to forest, you want to check the impact of the, and this is where we talk about carbon market. So, in that case, if you want to talk about impact could be negative or positive. And in this case, we can say impact is high which might be negatively high or positively high. I think that is why problem is coming on how to determine whether it has high impact or low impact. I know in this case now, if you want to check the impact of maybe posting energy saving signage, no, don't let me use that example. Like insulating hot water pipe. You know, like this one now. If its impact on the environment, it is friendly when you isolate your hot water pipe. Because the heat generated from the hot water pipe, we save everyone. And if you are checking the impact on the financial level, you will realize that the cost to use in insulating with that hot water pipe, just to save the environment, will be very high. So I think when we are checking impacts, maybe you have to take us through when you are checking impacts, we need to check whether it's either on the environment or the impact on the financial status of the firm, or whether positive or negative.
And that's what Samuel was getting at. That sometimes using the word impact, we perhaps have to blow it up slightly and say what's the financial impact, what's the environmental impact, what's the operational impact, like this. And so the reason why people would often argue, people would agree on cost, would mostly agree on cost, whether something is expensive or not expensive, to the extent that you've given a threshold. But impact and qualitative assessment like that is where we often struggle. Because I promise you, the person that says that it's low impact is correct, because we've got people who go and pee in places where they write, do not urinate here. And the person that says that, you know, it's high impact is correct, because for a right-thinking person, this should be a great reminder for you, right? And so every time we're going out, why do we have, you know, signs like exit and direction signs? It's because it should help guide our, you know, our actions. But does it truly guide our actions? We'll see zebra crossing and say, are you zebra? So my point is, stuff like signage, it really comes down to the culture within the organization. And I love the fact that someone spoke about compliance. I believe you were the one that spoke about compliance. That imagine that we are in an organization who wants to enforce this. That's where we put the compliance team to task. That every time you do not, you know, turn this off, here is the, you know, this is what you would have to do. This is the penalty for not doing that. And so I'm saying that you can also shift culture that way through compliance. And you can have a team that saves energy the most, because most times when we think compliance, we always think about the stick and never the carrots. But we can say that whatever team saves the most energy, you know, there'll be an award, and that's the way to drive behavioral changes as well. And so I don't want us to get stuck again on whatever the illustrative answer says, or whatever we've discussed here. The point again we should take away from this is, it's stuff like impact, qualitative issues like that. And that's why I keep repeating that what's going to be critical is tying this back to the company's strategy. If the company's ultimate strategy and focus is X, that company can say that, no, for us, energy is too important. Not only would we put stickers, we would still put this and put that, and, you know, and deploy this system and do the other one, because energy is so important to us. Some other company will say sticker is a bare minimum. The reason why I intentionally put stuff like this on it is because I want the training session to tie to each other. You'll remember that when I said that identify solutions, I said include even the most basic thing in your list of solutions. When you want to think about energy efficiency, a lot of people would never talk about signage, or sticker, or poster, or cardboard, whatever name you want to call it, right? Like, but put it there, like include every single item on there, and you would realize that with just this something as simple as posting energy savings signage, we can create an entire strategy around it. The team with the lowest energy savings, here's the penalty. The team with the highest energy savings, here's what you will get. And all of a sudden, what you ordinarily think would not save a lot or has low impact suddenly might have high impact, and you haven't spent anything. And you can have people like my bros who would say, we don't even need to use a signage. I'm artistic, let's just buy a card. In fact, I will donate the cardboard.
Marker.
You know, you is marker because you even have 2 pens. You even have 2 pens on your body already, you know. So that's the point. Someone said full HVAC upgrade will be low cost. And I saw someone immediately say, Abba, that can't be low cost. But again, low cost to who? You know, a company that, do you think full HVAC upgrade is expensive to Amazon? Because I promise you, Microsoft, because they're beginning to deploy data centers in this world of AI, they're like, we can't even find enough places to get energy. You know what? We'll tell them to go and fire up 3 Mile Island. That used to be a nuclear plant. So meaning Microsoft, that is a technology company, says energy is so important to us, we'll buy out a nuclear energy plant. As my brothers would say, money they where money. That person isn't bought, like for them, the energy is too critical to their business. They've gone past the level of if what it would mean is to start generating electricity, even though they are not in the business of electricity generation, they're willing to spend that much to do it. And so sometimes too, low cost versus high cost comes down to thresholds. So again, the person that says full HVAC upgrade, you know, it's low cost. Ordinarily, I would say it's high cost. In fact, that's what the solution says, right? But if you think about it, this is a local bakery. We don't know how much they make. We really don't know how much they don't. And the price of bread. What's happening with bread? I go to Lagos to the bread is now gold. Anyway, so this local bakery maybe is even already struggling. You now tell them to go and do full HVAC upgrade. The CEO, who in fact will not call himself CEO, will say to you that you and your environmental compliance, you can carry yourself and throw yourself inside the lagoon. All right. In fact, I'll speed past this. Forget about what's on the board. The key takeaway is that high impact, low cost items, really difficult to land on, but they are the most, you know, that those items that you should do first. Like if something is high impact, and by some magic it is low cost, it goes without saying that you want to prioritize that particular item, right? And because like you say, it offers the best ROI, best return on investment. It's low cost, it's high impact. Just go for that. All right, I promise you we're out of here we're breaking for lunch in the next 5 to 10 minutes. So remember, we're talking about how to make a business case, right? To set up a business case. And so what sort of questions, beyond all this, I don't think it's high cost, it's high cost. What kind of questions can help guide the conversation? You know, first thing is, what problem are we trying to solve? You hear me keep saying that, how does this tie back to our ultimate strategy? What problem are we exactly trying to solve? Why are we prioritizing water usage if the problem we're trying to solve is energy? Except there's a link, you know, between those two things. So it's important that you ask yourself, what problem you're trying to solve? Is there an example of success somewhere? Do we have a competitor that's deployed this? Have we seen it somewhere? This bros, for example, that travels a lot, did he go to China and he saw it deployed there? Someone gave an example, and I think it was such a brilliant example that he found out that solar wasn't exactly working well for him in the West, in Lagos. But he went to Kano and he saw that this was what they were using. And it's something as simple as the solar irradiation in the north. It's just higher, right, like that than what we have in the West, And so, do we have a competitor? Do we have a company that's deployed something like this before? What was the lesson? What did they? What was the outcome? Those are some of the questions. Are there alternative solutions? Should we just paste sticker like Michael has suggested that we should paste? Or should we do full HVAC upgrade? What would the future look like when we implement it? This is a question nobody, people rarely ask. We just think about these problems today, but what's the difference between the stage that we're in now and when we implement this thing, what it will look like? do we even have a vision for this? What do we envision this to look like? Another one, and please, the answer to this one should be external consultant. It will be the external consultant. Should we be doing this in-house, or should we get an external consultant to do this? I see a lot of companies, and I will not indict my own company as well. They would rather just go get an external consultant, even though you have fantastic people in-house that can deploy the solution. So sometimes we need to ask, but sometimes, to be honest, the external consultant is the right approach to take because we just don't have the skill in-house. Sometimes it's hybrid. This thing has 5 steps. Maybe the external consultant should do the first 3 and we will do the last 2. Maybe we'll do the first 2 and they will do the last 3. Maybe they will do the 1 to 5, but they will then train our staff so that from next year we are able to do it ourselves. And then of course on project milestones, is there a minimum viable solution? Can we start with 1 plant first? Rather than changing the entire system, can we try to start with 1 plant? Let's see how it will work. Or can we start with the LED which of it in the packaging room? Let's see how much energy that would save before we just start changing the LED. We start using LED everywhere. What does progress look like for us? What milestones should we put in place? And then finally, what are the progress metrics? What are the KPIs that we should put in place? What are the progress markers? A lot of people deploy these things and they don't even measure the outcome. So how do you know whether you're tracking? Because sometimes what you do is that you change from a certain bulb to another type of bulb, and you say, well, our energy cost has dropped by 5%, and you're happy. When in actual fact, the people who, when they make this particular switch, it has the potential to save you 30%. But because we don't have KPIs, we don't have metrics in place, you just said, this thing has reduced from 5 million to 3 million, and that's fine. When in actual fact, your savings can go as high as, 1 million. So, for the project itself, before you implement the project, you want to ask yourself, what are the costs before we implement this? So for example, do we need to do an audit first? What are the operating costs before we start? What's our current operating costs? Sometimes is the question. What's our current operating costs? Beyond cost, remember that I said that you also want to consider some other things. When you say cost, what's our current energy consumption, our current fresh water consumption? What does our company image look like today? Do we have it intact? If we deploy this solution, does it help to enhance our company image? Those kind of questions are the ones you want to ask. And then you want to also ask the question, what are now the operating cost variations now that we've implemented? Meaning, diesel, we used to spend 50 million before. Now that we've implemented this thing, how much are we going to be spending? So following the implementation of the project, I've seen situations where you deploy a solution that is cheaper, but the operating and maintenance cost is higher. And so ultimately, you get back to where you started from. So sometimes it's not even about savings. That might be what you would do, but it might just be that the environmental impact is what would have gone down. So to your point, it might be that it's the same financial cost, whether you're doing diesel or the other one, but it might be the environmental cost that you will drop. It might be that your company image now becomes better. It might be that you start complying with environmental laws. It might be that it opens up a new market for you because you can now say to them in Europe that you're not using a high emission-based energy production system. It's low emissions. And so that opens up a new market for you. And so those are the kind of questions you want to ask yourself with these few words of mine. I hope I've been able to convince Dr. Ben, and not to confuse you, that there's a way to frame your business case in a way that will not only focus on values, but can focus on value as well. When you haven't described what the problem is, you haven't spoken about what the solution is, you haven't given us the market or regulatory context, and by market and regulatory context, I mean 2 things. I mean that you do an industry research, but you also talk about your competitors. You talk about what applies in the competitive space today. Are there rules, for example, around solar implementation? Is there a certain tax that you have to pay? Is there a particular place where it is cheaper? You want to put all of that on a market and regulatory context. Talk about your implementation plan. I would emphasize this a million times and a million times over. please do not write a plan without how you will implement it. And by implementation, I specifically mean put milestones, timelines, responsible parties in the business plan. And then financial strategy. Financial strategy is another one that my accountant's table right there, they would hear. And what immediately pops in their head is balance sheets, income statement, and cash flow. And they're beginning to talk about metrics. When in actual fact, what I mean is a strategy. Where are we going to raise the money from? How much do we need to raise? Would it be a mix of equity and debt? What will be the cost of capital before we start now building our fancy looking models? Because more often than not, I've seen people build financial models that I will check against the business plan and it is disjointed. For example, the marketing plan or the marketing plan section of the business plan can say, we intend to expand into Onitsha, Kaduna, and Abakaliki within the next 18 months. And look at the financial plan, there's no marketing expense inside the financial model. Both the plan and the financial model are disjointed. Why? Because finance is doing their own thing. Engineering is doing their own thing. In fact, I've seen a plan where, I promise you I'm not lying, I've seen a plan where the technical section talks about solar. And I can't see any cost of solar panel in the financial model. And the financial model, the interesting thing is, fancy looking Excel document. It has VLOOKUP functions, if error, XLOOKUP. It has all the Excel functions in it, but has no bearing at all on what the technical section has said. And so, it's why I call it a financial strategy. And it's a strategy because it has to tie back. It's not just financial metrics. It's not just throwing around words like IRR and payback period. It goes beyond that. It should actually tie the plan together with our finance. Finally, we want to talk about risk and mitigation. Risk is another section that I find interesting. We'll list out risk and put full stop and not talk about the mitigation strategy. The message that says to me is that you're telling me the reason why this thing will not work. There's no way you write a risk section and you do not include the mitigation strategy that will follow it in there. Because if you say to me that raising funds will be difficult, and you don't say to me that, oh, but I have identified BOI that has rate at such and such percentage, you've just said to me that there's no way for you to raise the funds. Or if you say that there's a technical risk here that this thing might not work, and you do not say that, oh, we'll do pilot phase and we'll do testing, some level of testing initially. You just said to me the reason why this should not work. And you are my bros, even though it's nice looking, I promise you that the best we'll do to you is to nicely return your plan to you and not give you the money that you have requested. Okay, so each one of these then delves into the individual section. For problem statement, I've stolen the idea, and you notice that most of the time on most of the slides, I keep saying three things. That's because McKinsey, they've said, based on their research, that when you say three, it sounds short enough for people to remember, but also long enough for it to sound grandiose, like you're saying something that is. If you say two, it looks too small. If you say five, it's becoming a long list. So what I've done is try and help us remember this and distill it into 3 points. So for problem statement, you want to do 3 things. You want to define what the challenge is, 1. Tell us what the cost or risk of maintaining the status quo is, and outline the opportunity. So look at this problem statement I have on the board, for example. The company currently spends 30 million naira annually on diesel generators due to grid unreliability, meaning that electricity, PHC, they give us light, leading to elevated emissions and operating costs. Now, your business plan, the problem statement will not be 4 lines like this or 2 lines like this. It will be more robust, but you've got to find the balance between learn and detail. So you don't want to also write 10 pages of problem, only you get problem. You don't want to write 10 pages of a problem statement, but you want it to be as detailed as possible, but also not too long. What's critical is that he has these 3 elements. You define what the challenge is, you tell us what the cost or risk of maintaining the status quo is, and then you outline what the opportunity for savings are. See that magic number 3 again. Your RCP solution, you should define it in 3 ways. Number 1, define the solution. Very importantly, number 2, define the technical approach. Now, my organ in BOI might not be an engineer, but he at least wants to be sure that your technical team is part of the development of this plan, and you know the technical thing you want to do. Now, I'm not saying that you should litter it with technical jargon and such that nobody understands what you're doing, and we have to now go and collect a specialist. And sometimes they do, you know, but you want to ensure that you don't just say solar. You tell us what, you know, the nameplate capacity is. You want to tell us how much energy, you know, it will generate. You want to be sure that, since I think we'll get into that in a second. But anyways, talk about the technical solution in as much detail as is required, but also not too technical such that nobody understands what you're saying. And then finally, tell us how we align with RCP principles. So see, we've said we want to install a waste heat recovery system on the boiler flue, which that would allow for preheating processed water, reducing fuel demand by 25%. So all the 3 elements are involved in the solution statement. Similar to the problem statement, remember, it has to be long enough, you don't write 3 lines like that, long enough that people know that you understand the solution that you're speaking about, but also not 200 pages like a consultant will. The market and regulatory context, this part, you see that again, it's 3 things. Industry overview and competitive dynamics. And this is how, you know, the environmental impact is important. The second thing is that you want to talk about the regulation. What's the regulatory context? Are there certain taxes that will pay if we implement this? Are there certain savings that will save if we implement this? Are there first mover advantage that we'll get by implementing this? That's the second thing. The third element under your industry section is that you want to talk about the supply chain and your customers. How does this thing impact the customer? Is it in the quality of service that we now render to them? Is it in the quality of the product? Have there been other competitors that have deployed this and now have a competitive edge above us because of this? We want to talk about the supply chain to the end that you would even say things like, we think that we'll source this from China because it's cheaper in China than it is to source it from Germany. Or we'll source ours from Germany because of the high quality that the German machines used to give. You know, or because of the time it would take for us to get it from Germany as compared to China, or from China as compared to Germany, or would rather go to Ghana. You get the point. Like, you want to include supply chain considerations inside the industry analysis. Brush, you were writing when I said the structure. After market and regulatory context, what's next? It's implementation plan. The implementation plan, I've sort of like hammered on it quite a bit. The first thing you want to do is make the decision. Are we going to do this thing in-house, or are we going to get external consultants? If you get external consultants, what part of this thing will they work on? Right? If you get external consultants, have they done this before? More often than not, I'll see people use external consultants or external engineers that have never deployed the solution before, and our company is the guinea pig for the deployment. Sometimes it's not that they haven't deployed it before, they've deployed it before, but at a company that is slightly different from ours. And so we would make the mistake of saying, because you've deployed it somewhere before, we will not look at the nuances within our company, or the concentrations or the differences between what's happening in that company and how it is different from ours. It might be just that that company is smaller than our own. And so the scale at which we need the deployment to happen in our own requires more technical adeptness. But no, we'll say because it's been deployed before, they've done it before, you know, they can also do it for us. So questions like that when we decide to use external consultants, important. The second thing you want to consider is, do we have, what's the site like? Do we need to create a new site for this project that we want to deploy? What's the state of the environment that we want to deploy this? Does our staff have the quality training, whether or not we do it internally or externally? So for example, if you use external consultants, imagine that they deploy, but the internal staff do not have the technical know-how to operate the equipment. That's another consideration, right, within your implementation plan. The third element and the critical element is this idea of milestones that I said earlier. How long will this thing take? Are we going to do it in phases? Who will be responsible for what? What are the key metrics that we'll be tracking? Do we want to put buffer, even though we know that this thing only takes 4 months? But we know that Suez Canal can suddenly just get blocked. And so the time it would take normally to get to Nigeria is 30 days. Do we want to bake in another 15 days? Do we want to bake in time for, what if it rains? You know, we're implementing this during rainy season. What if the engineers can't come? What if they miss their flights? If they are bringing them from Germany. What if their visas don't come out early? You want to put in all of those sections into your implementation plan and include buffer time in there. Because it's better to under-promise and over-deliver than over-promise. Thank you. We are following. All right. So that's that about implementation plan. What's the next step? Okay. Now I know that you're working. So now the next step is financial strategy. And if you look at my slide when we share it with you, there are 2 sections there. I keep saying that it's a strategy and not just metrics. And so the first thing you see on that slide is that you need to have a funding plan. How do we intend to fund this thing that we're raising? We spoke about it during the implementation framework. You want to think about number 1. Are we going to raise the funding internally? Do we have sufficient capital internally to fund this? If we don't, are we going to look externally? If we look externally, are we going to use debt? Or are we going to use equity? If we're going to use debt, are we going to a commercial bank? Or we are going to BOI? Or we are going to a mix of both? What should the repayment term look like? It's after that that we then get our friends at the back there, the accountants, then come on board to start telling us what our ratios currently look like and what those ratios will translate into. When we come back in September, and I've said this and I'll repeat it again, we'll open the secret of bankers and we'll get into financial metrics. Now, most of us always run away from anything finance because by the time those people back there who are very smart say things like earnings before interest and tax, EBIT, we would say, it'd be like now only finance people, they understand this kind of thing. And so we would say we are not interested. But I promise you, if someone that was supposed to do pharmacy, that they gave agric, someone that is not too smart, can understand this finance thing, I promise you everybody in this room can understand it. And the plan is not to make us finance staff. The plan is to help us to have meaningful conversations, not only with our finance team, but also with our funding partners. And so when our partners come to us and they say things like, we can only give you 10 million, we would know why it's just 10 million and not the 20 million that we requested for. In fact, we'll do better and not request for 20 million because we already know that based on our numbers, it's only 10 million that we can get. All right, so that's that about funding and financing strategy. What's the next thing? Risk mitigation. Now, risk can be, you can talk about technical risk, for example. Like what's the possibility, what's the risk that this thing will not operate as expected or up to capacity? For example, people will see a solar panel and say the nameplate capacity is 500 megawatts, but sometimes you forget that the sun will not shine every day. What's going to be the efficiency of that solar panel? We've got to think about that. But sometimes it's also not that you don't consider the nameplate capacity and the efficiency. What's the risk that this thing will not run as expected? And so what's the mitigation strategy for that, for example? It might be that we'll tell our engineering partners to test run this thing. It might be that we'll say that let's show me where you deployed it in the past and how did it work. It might be that rather than doing it at scale at the moment, we would initially start with a pilot phase. We'll do it on the pilot phase and then ultimately go and do it at a large scale once we now know how it works remotely. Remember, how we said we'll do LED in the packaging room first before we now deploy it across the entire organization. Another risk can be financial risk. So, for example, this my daddy that wants to go to Germany to bring his products, forgetting that exchange rate is doing kalo in Nigeria. And as such, one of his risks, he will not only describe it as financial risk, he will call it foreign exchange risk. What if the price stays the same, but the exchange rate has gone up? How does that impact your ability to get this product that you've sold, you've built business case for, you've done all of that for? How does that impact your ability to bring it down to Nigeria? And so what's the mitigation strategy? Do we want to buy futures? Do we want to get into a forward contract? Do we want to do stuff like that? Or do we want to say this foreign exchange risk is such that it is not diversifiable? Let's go and look for a place where we can source it locally. Do you understand? Some people would say that what I want to get is a floating rate loan. What that means is that the loan is not a fixed interest, which is maybe like 30% fixed, and that's what you pay. It can be LIBOR plus something. Now, they don't use LIBOR again. I need to remember what they use now. But let's assume that it's LIBOR plus something. LIBOR too can do kalu and go up, and as such, your interest rate is not fixed. So you can be exposed to interest rate risk. How do you intend to hedge that? Or do you want to set aside some money as buffers? Those kind of things are what you want to include in your mitigation strategy as you start identifying what your risk and challenges your risk are. I can get into operational risk. I've seen a situation where people wanted to deploy solar, and they said they wanted to do rooftop solar, but the surface area of their roof is not sufficient to power what they want to power. You think like these things are so basic and people should know, but I promise you it's easy for people to forget things like this, especially when you want to deploy solar and it is finance that is at the table. Your engineering team is not there, your technical team is not there. The consultant just came with glossy slides and said we can do this. Right, so you also want to consider things like that. Again, we can go on and on and on about the kind of risks that are available and the mitigation strategy you should put in place. The point is that you should include risk, and you should put, don't stop at listing out risk, you should include mitigation strategies. What's the next thing? Now, that's the last thing because it's executive summary. But in my slide, I included something called other considerations. These other considerations, though, in Lagos, we decided that we should not just call it other considerations, but because it's a critical part of this, so we should call it key considerations or environmental considerations. So, we gave an example of a particular project where they got the land already. It was time for them to build the project, only for them to get there and the community disagreed. You know what my finance friends, my accounting friends call the cost that you used to buy the land? They'll call it sunk, meaning the money has, well, maybe you can sell the land. The point is that there are other considerations that you've got to think about. We want to use water in this particular place. This water source is the same one where the communities get water from. Have we gotten consent from them? How much emissions will this reduce? Is it even worth it? You know, if we're going from diesel to something, but the emission difference isn't so much, we want to consider something else. It might even be things as simple as noise. Maybe what you want to deploy is very loud. How does this constitute noise pollution in that environment? And what would the community think about it? I was giving the example about the project that did not go forward. A wind project in one of the developed countries, and I won't mention the name, because someone says every time I drive, I love seeing the greenery. If you put on these wind vanes or these wind panels, it will cause visual pollution. I never heard that one. It will cause visual pollution, and this person was able to get sufficient, people to sign up to it, and that's the only reason why the project did not move forward. Imagine project not moving forward because someone says this thing will cause visual pollution. My point is that there are considerations outside of just costs that you've got to think about, which would include things like environmental considerations and social considerations. And then finally, after you've written all of these, you can then get into executive summary. Because most times, that my boss there will decide from just reading your executive summary, which is why it's important that the executive summary you write after you've taken all the different items into considerations, so that you're very succinct about your executive summary, but it's robust enough for someone to read, whether it's management who doesn't have time, or the banker who doesn't have too much time because they are looking at a ton of projects, and they will say, okay, this has every single element that we require for the project before they start digging into specific sections that they did not understand, or they need more details. I have just two things left to do here, because I'm the one standing in between you and your lunch. First thing is to say that tomorrow we'll have a case study. Tomorrow, I'm not going to be speaking too much English. We're going to take a company that has certain, and we've identified certain RECP issues. We even included costs, we included environmental considerations. And in our table groups, we'll write out, we'll go through every single section of the business plan and we'll walk through it. So you'll see the case study and then you write problem statements. We'll come together and debrief on what problem statement is the right one, which one should we update, how you should approach it. And then next we'll go into solution, and on and on and on like that. And so tomorrow it's your show. In fact, I'll just be dressed casually that tomorrow. And we will together write the business plan, because, and let me calculate it by saying this is not going to be a robust business plan. You will not sit down here and write a business plan in 2 hours. But what we'll do is to ensure that you get your hands dirty a bit. In fact, we'll even argue a bit more tomorrow when it's time to decide what solution to pick. Because what I will force you to do is that there will be 5 or so RECP options for this particular company, and your table will be forced to decide which one you would prioritize using all the tools that we've learned in our toolkit today. All right. Final thing I will do is to quickly run us through what we've done today. Remember, we started out by doing a refresher. We said we defined what RECP is, we defined what IE is, and we included sectors. We gave sector examples. After that, we moved into the key drivers of IE and RECP. We said there are 4. We said it can be cost related, it can be environmental related, it can be expansion into a new market, and it can be getting green financing, access to green financing. From there, we spoke about what banks are currently doing today, and we spoke about how they can do more. Someone even said, how can it be just 10 billion naira? Even my company can dash the bank with 10 billion naira that I've said is the entire pot, and that's not sufficient money. We then spoke about how we have to take a strategic lens to this, what the companies have to do, what financial institutions have to do, and what do we have to do at a systemic level. After that, we moved on into what we said was the different sources of capital. We said it can be as cheap as grants, it can be as expensive as equity. And we said right in the middle of all of that is where you've got debt. So it can be bonds, it can be corporate debt, and it can be project financing. We said the difference between corporate debt and project financing is that corporate debt is recourse, meaning that I can come and lay claim to the asset of the company. But for project finance, it's a non-recourse loan, meaning that we can only lay claim to the asset of the project that we've lent money against. And so we ended our refresher that way and moved into building a business case. We said that, why is a business, why are business cases important? We said there are 3 things you must consider. Prioritize value ahead of values, right? If you remember, we said prioritize value ahead of values. We said that you should ensure that when you start out, you want to talk about profitability. After that, once you've spoken about profitability, the next thing you want to prioritize is the operating, the cost savings that you might get from this. After you talk about cost savings, you now say what are the operational considerations. And that was when we were giving the example of students where flooding has happened, and that has impacted their performance. An operational consideration in that situation, for example, is if we build these flood plains, well, maybe students will now do better, you know, in school. And we said when we brought that down into the corporate world, we said maybe staff will start working, you know, shorter hours, you know, there will be less machine downtime. Moved away from that and we had this prioritization framework, right? We said when an issue happens, you either, when you identify a gap, either decide to do something or do nothing. If you decide to do something, you identify the set of solutions that are available, and then the other thing you then do is to look for stakeholders, ensure that all the stakeholders are brought to the board. When you bring all the stakeholders on board, you want to do quantitative and qualitative assessments. When you do quantitative and qualitative assessment, you want to identify the risk and then rank which of the solutions it is that you go with. After that, we get into the world of financing. Like, are we going to raise money internally? Are we going to raise money externally? If you're raising externally, is it debt, equity, or both? And ultimately, that's how you make your business case. And then we got into the world of metrics. We did opportunity metrics where people were arguing on ease of implementation. Michael said it did not include impact, not knowing that I came ready for him. Right. There was one bros there too that was throwing different technical language at me. He was saying levelized cost of electricity, LCOE. He was throwing all of those. But my God, that I said, will not shame you. It was such that all the technical things that he said, God helped me, and the Holy Spirit revealed those things to me. So I was able to explain all those things that he said. And then once we moved away from, you know, from all of those, we then got into the world of what now? Business planning, right? We said that one critical element of a business plan. No, before that, after moving from opportunity metrics, we did 2x2 metrics. High impact, low impact, high cost, low cost, and we argued about signages. Someone said it should be a cardboard. Someone says it should be a sticker. Someone says it should be both. Someone says, and we said no, but ultimately it comes down to the culture that you can see, do not urinate here, and people will still stay there and urinate. You can still post no bill, and people will still put election stickers there. And so ultimately it comes down to culture, and that with impact, it's tricky. You've got to think about quantitative and qualitative aspect of impact. And Samuel, the forestry guy, says that in fact you have to think about positive and negative impact. You've got to think about financial and non-financial impact. And then we talked about, the way we ended that section was to say, well, there are certain questions you should ask yourself, you know, around problem statement, you ask yourself questions around metrics, and then you should decide what are the operating costs before we implement this thing, and what are the operating costs after we implemented this thing. We decided to break for lunch, but the lunch was not ready for us. So we came back and we started doing business plan. And we spoke about the different elements of a business plan. I thought we spoke about that. The first thing we noticed, because Michael is a very smart person, he looked at the board and said, why is executive summary the last thing? And we said that, well, there's someone here that already has a dictionary. And that when we looked at the dictionary, an executive summary is something that summarizes a body of work. So what are you summarizing when you've not written the body of work? And so we said, well, what's this body of work? We said you start with your problem statement, you go on to your solution statement. After that, you do an industry analysis. After you do your industry analysis, you do what? Funding. After you've done funding, you do, no, you would have done implementation plan, you then do funding. After funding, and we said, please, with the implementation plan, ensure you include who is responsible, what milestones are there, and what time we'll use to deploy this. And we said also include buffers in this implementation plan. We then went on to funding strategy. And we said this funding strategy is not just financial metrics like our accountants want. We have to determine where we are going to raise the money from, how we are going to raise it before we then open any Excel worksheet at all. And we spoke about risk. We said, please do not make the mistake of just listing out risk without including mitigation strategies. And then after that, we said, this my bros said, I've been following you, so the last thing is executive summary. And I said, no, there's something that you cannot see now, but it's on the slide, and it's other considerations. And the professor immediately caught on to that and said, I suspect it will be environmental and social considerations, and she was right. And ultimately, we gave the example of these people who had bought the land, were ready to kickstart the project, and the community said no. And so even though it might sound like environmental and social considerations are other considerations, they are not. They're in fact part and parcel of the considerations that we have to with these few words of mine.
Amazing.
I hope I've been able to convince, not to confuse write it last, and then so that I can capture all the elements of.
Seeking for a form. Because I'm talking about bankable ROECP plan. There are some existing standard or organization that we will lay executive summary at the beginning before any other activity. For example, this NROF, okay, National Research Fund from 10th floor. They make executive summary first before any other thing which you have determined. So I want to ask, is it related to this specific area or is it cast of stone when seeking bankable plan?
All right, that's a great question.
Okay, yeah, so because I think that was just the last thing you just said. Yes. But you cannot do a summary until you have the body of work. Just like somebody writing a book, thesis, project and all that. The abstract comes last. However, in presentation, you put the abstract first, and then other work will not follow. So just as you had mentioned earlier.
That's what I'm saying, organization, we have to abstract is first.
Yeah, they do all that first, but when you're presenting the project work, you put your abstract. But you first must have done everything before you now extract or put in your. So what I'm saying is that you must have done everything before that executive summary will come. It comes first in putting the report, but you must have done the others when you extract the information.
Okay, I'm not saying the line is top.
3 things that made me happy once I walked in. First, we had people that were in this training the last time. And so if any question comes up from refresher section, those people will do what? Answer. I said there are people from the banks. If I ask question comes up, who will answer? But the Holy Spirit now ministered to me as well that there are people from university that are professors in the room, that when business plan related questions come up, they will answer. I am like that man who has seen the future.
One thing you can't take away from him is the interactive nature of the delivery. No dull moment. You are engaged. You want to think. You want to make comments. You want to contribute. And I think that's very, very good, especially when you are also dealing with people from private sector. So once again, I would like us to give him another round of applause. I am not standing in between you and your lunch. So lunch is set. We are going to have lunch, but I just feel it's expedient that I mentioned to us that Bank of Industry, there is a segment tomorrow. The Bank of Industry will be speaking to us. So all the questions we've been bombarding man with, bombarding the branch secretary with, Bank of Industry will be here to answer them, especially speaking largely to eligibility criteria as it pertains to this project. But of course, when you have somebody from Bank of Industry in-house, you can use the opportunity to ask about what that wants. So I just feel I should mention that so that we won't have the case of people disappearing tomorrow. If there's any part of this workshop you mustn't miss, it's tomorrow. So, bon appetit. And go and have your lunch.
So if you take that loan, we will follow you to your office or to your factory to see what you are going to use that money for. Make sure it's not meant for paying salary or making anything. Then at the end of the day, component 5, there will be a sort of competition. If you uptake the methodologies, your company will be invited to Lagos to come and share your experiences. And this will attract some gift. So either high impact or low impact, you just have to do that. Then for other things to happen, we will monitor the loan given to you, though we are not going to help you to pay, then we monitor what you are going to use the loan for. If you have a paper, if I gave you a paper for interview, please, if you are ready today, let us know so that we can interview you. Because tomorrow there is going to be other side event and information. And if we start early tomorrow, we finish early. When we come in the morning, those side events will be unveiled to us.